Hey, Bruce Naylor, aka Frugal Tech, and I wanted to make this video to do a review of the Panasonic Lumix Fz1000 bridge camera from the eyes of a YouTube content creator, because that's why I bought this camera, was to make YouTube videos, specifically the ability to record in 4K and then downsample that to 1080p. That was and is the whole purpose to having this camera. Now, I will tell you that I spent quite a bit of time perusing forums and researching this camera before I ordered it from Amazon a couple months ago. For the 700, I think it was around $750 for this camera at the time I bought it. Really, there wasn't much out there or anything at all that I could really find in that price range that offered all the features that this camera offered at this price point. Some people say that this is the little brother to the Panasonic Lumix GH4, which is a very popular camera. These have been selling like crazy out in the marketplace. So, you know, again, I'm not a camera guy. I just want to highlight some of the great things about using this camera to make your YouTube videos, and then some of the things that maybe aren't so good about this camera, and then you can be the judge as to whether or not this is something for you. Now, you'll notice right away I have the optical VM100 shotgun mic mounted to this camera, and it connects via a 3.5mm jack on the camera, and that's great that you can hook up external audio to this thing. The little brother to this camera, I shouldn't say little brother, but the prior generation was the F Zed 200, and it had this funky 2.5mm audio input jack, and you had to use an adapter in order to use your shotgun mic. That problem's been resolved in this camera. It is built as a 4K camera. It is a 1-inch 20 megapixel sensor on here, but the actual resolution is 3840 by 2160 as opposed to 4096 by 2160. This means that there will be some cropping involved. The lens is a 25 to 400 millimeter equivalent, 35 millimeter equivalent lens. So it's quite long. It gives you a 16 times optical zoom, as I understand it, on this camera. It does have Leica, so I keep wanting to say Zeis, but it has a Leica lens. I've heard people and saw people writing this say, well, it's actually Leica in name only. It's made by Panasonic and licensed by these folks. But I can tell you it's a very wonderful, bright, beautiful lens. The aperture is f2.8 to 4, so it's variable. The further out you zoom, the more the aperture changes. It's not a constant aperture all the way through. One of the things that I like about this camera is it also features clean HDMI output. Now, the thought process behind that was at some point I could do live streams to YouTube, for example, by getting a HDMI capture card and hooking up to my computer. So it's really important to have clean HDMI output, so that way you're not seeing on the video all the various options that the camera presents in the viewfinder. Another feature I like about this is lens resume. So essentially, when you get this set up and you're making your YouTube videos and you're at the right distance, and a lot of this is going to depend on the style of YouTube video that you make. I do a lot of talking head stuff where the camera is mounted on a tripod and it's about 2 meters from me. I get it kind of dialed in. I don't want to have to do that every time I record, so I set lens resume, and when I fire it up, it automatically goes to where I left off. That's a very nice feature to have. As far as the 4K recording goes, it records at about 100 megabits per second, so you need a very fast SD card the SDXC, and I believe it's like the U3 designation in order to record in 4K. It also records in 1080p as well as 720p. There is a 120 frame per second mode, slow mode, and that will record in 1080p as well. So if you're capturing video, maybe of kids playing or whatever, and you want to use that in your video, and you want to have that capability, well, then that's great part of having this camera. Another great feature of the camera is the 5-axis image stabilization. Again, my videos tend to be mounted on a tripod, but with 5-axis, we actually have stabilization of the lens this way, back and forth, just all different ways on there. Bear in mind that the OIS, or optical image stabilizer, stays engaged even when you turn it off. There's a side switch up here for the stabilizer, turn it off, but it's still actually holding that lens in place. So just to know that. Another feature is that it has built-in Wi-Fi and NFC on here, and there is a really nice app for your smartphone to remote control this camera. Something also that I like very much is the fully articulating LCD display. It is not touch. There's been others that say that the prior generation, the F Zed1000, was touch. It was not. It is what it is, but it is very bright, very clear, and very, very useful. Then we have the EVF, the electronic viewfinder, up here. And if you're shooting outdoors, it's very bright. That is really, really nice. Everything's very clear on there. And it's actually got a sensor. So as you bring the camera up to your eye, it engages right there and off you go. So that's very well designed. On the lens, you can manually control the zoom ring here, this ring here, to either be focus or zoom. But it is fly-by-wire, so it's not real buttery smooth. So as I turn it on here, I'll show you. You would think that if you turn the ring very quickly, the zoom would extend very quickly, but it doesn't. I'm really turning it very fast. It's very, very slow. But now if I turn the ring slowly, look how much faster it goes in. Turn it slow, really comes out. Turn it fast, very slow. I'm not sure what the thinking was behind that. Those are some of the pros of using this camera. You get beautiful 4K video that you can downsample to 1080p. It is 30 frames per second. You can't do 4K 60 FPS yet on this camera. I don't suspect you ever will at any point. Irregardless, like I said, I'm not really a camera guy. But there are some real cons to this camera that I wanted to share with you if you're considering creating YouTube content with it. One of the major complaints about this camera is the fact that the battery compartment and the SD card slot are all in one location underneath the body of the camera. And as you can see right here, the part where you would mount your tripod quick release plate is off center. So when you put it on there and you get it on, it actually blocks access to the compartment for the SD card and the battery. And when you're especially shooting 4K, if you want to transfer the files via USB, you can do that, but they can get quite huge and it can be a very lengthy process. So I like to pop out the SD card and put it in the card reader. But using USB is really not practical. So you have to disassemble the quick release plate to get to the SD card. This has been a big complaint of the Panasonic camera. In all fairness, I knew this before I bought the camera. I've also dealt with this issue with the FZ200. It's one of the quirks of this camera that you have to deal with. So if you need fast access to the SD card, and that's really, really important to you, you could fabricate something to accommodate the tripod mount and move it away from the battery compartment. that is a possibility that you could do that at some point. Let's talk about some of the other cons of this camera. One of the things that really bothered me is I was used to recording audio using my shotgun microphone on my Fz1000. Unfortunately, on this camera, it's got a very loud lens barrel noise coming from it, which is the optical image stabilization motor maintaining the position of the lens. Now, some people, their cameras are fairly quiet. I know two different YouTubers that have this camera. They're claiming that they're not getting a lot of noise from the lens barrel. I, on the other hand, have an extremely noisy lens, so noisy that you could not even begin to use the internal microphone, and the external microphone actually picks it up somewhat. You can eliminate some of that noise in post, but then it kind of screws up with the audio. When taking YouTube videos, though, I find it's best to use a lav microphone and record to an external sound source. I could actually plug my lav directly into the camera, as it does have built-in level meters as well. Another issue I have with the camera is, unlike any of the other cameras that I own, when I record in my studio, the walls are kind of an off-white. No matter what I do, including using the gray, like a color balance, white balance card, a gray card, is really low on the blue scale on your RGB parade within Final Cut Pro. So I find myself having to tweak color quite a bit to get more of a proper white balance. This is not an issue I've had with any other camera. It's also not weatherproofed. So if your style of video shooting is going to do a lot of outside stuff, you're going to have to be very careful not to allow this machine to get wet, or you could ruin the camera potentially. Autofocus, let's talk about this a little bit. As a YouTube content creator, you would just like to turn on autofocus and maybe even set it to full auto and just record. That is not a good idea with this camera. Even though it does have nice continuous focus, you'll find that the focus hunts quite easily on this camera, and it becomes confused kind of easy with it. What I've found has worked best for me is to use spot mode and leave it there and just adjust the area of it. 49-point autofocus also seems to work pretty well. One feature that is real handy when you're dealing with focus is the zebra output on the camera, so you can use that and deal with, I think, exposure that way with it. As I said, 4K recording is part of this camera and one of the main selling points. But be aware that it essentially has a limit of around 4 gigabytes per file, and then it will split it to another, and to another, and to another, and to another. So you really should have a nice size SDXC card in this machine if you're going to be recording lengthy kind of videos. You're going to be dealing with really massive file sizes. Another issue that may or may not be an issue for you is the fact that your recording time is limited to no more than 29 minutes 59 seconds. This is not Panasonic's fault. This has something to do with, I believe, Europe and the way they tax the camcorder versus a camera. If it could record any longer than that, you would have to, I guess they'd have to pay additional tax. What's interesting is the Fz1000, the older version, if you record an AVC HD, actually we're just limited to the length of the SD card. All in all, this camera takes some really great video. The optical image stabilization is first class in this camera, but it comes at a cost of a lot of noise. This is not a camera to use run and gun audio. It's not a camera really to use outside. If you even suspect a hint of rain out there, it may not be a good idea. If you have to get access to the SD card quickly, also you might want to consider potentially either another camera or fabricating something to get around this, which is most unfortunate. The autofocus doesn't really work that well, in my opinion. Low light, it does seem to do pretty well in low light. better than other bridge cameras, including the FZ200. There are a couple great features from the GH4 that's been passed down to this camera, including a couple recording styles. I think there's Cine D and Cine V recording formats, again passed down from the big brother, the GH4. At the end of the day, it's all about compromises on a camera, and this camera to me represents some great features, but at a cost of things like weatherproofing, poor design of the battery compartment, a loud motor. It does for me pretty well, and I'm glad that I have the camera. However, I would seriously consider possibly a 4K camcorder now that they're available for under $1,000, as opposed to this for making YouTube videos. But that's just me. You might be just fine with this. I'm not looking at this as a general photography camera, although it takes amazingly detailed photographs. Of course, also having the ability to record in 4K allows you to basically grab a frame from a video and save it as an 8 megapixel photograph, which in turn is suitable for print. All in all, I think for the money, this is a whole bunch of compromises. Would I recommend this camera to a friend making YouTube videos? I would tell them to think long and hard about it. If they got a unit that was relatively quiet, so much the better. If a camcorder did not meet their needs, then yes, I would recommend this camera. But be aware that you are buying something that has a lot of room for improvement, but offers a lot of features for the money. And that is my kind of review. Looking at this camera to make YouTube videos, the remote app is really nice if you're a one-man band. I will tell you, the NFC also a disappointment. It's on the bottom. Got to kind of touch it with your phone down at the bottom. But if you're a one-man band, I think it's going to be okay for most people. So that's it. And I would like your comments down below. I'll talk to you later.